Welcome to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we are having a conversation with Ray Wizbowski that we have not had in over 250 episodes with C-Suite executives. We're going to talk about nailing C-Suite success, but under a PE playbook. And a lot of us operate in that kind of an environment. And even if we don't, what we're going to be talking about today has tons of learning for us. And as we, as C-suite executives, manage our companies. And that's one of the points, Ray, I want to really point out here. And you and I were just talking about this, is that when we become C-suite executives, and you've been a C-suite for over 10 years, you're actually a 4-time B2B CMO, we don't give up our functional responsibilities of being, head of marketing, right? But we take on the responsibility of the long-term sustainable growth of the business, right? And so that means we have to think at a broader, deeper way, how we integrate with everyone else in a way that we haven't before, because we're part of the C-suite and we're accountable to the board and the PE firm.
Yeah. And your sponsor. Your sponsor is, they're the ones who are definitely wanting to see a return on the invested capital that they put into the company.
Absolutely. So before we get started, I'd love to learn a little bit more about you. I know you started out in nonprofit. That has applications. You are an avid outdoorsman. You and your wife are extremely active. And congratulations, you have a daughter that's graduating this year from college, or actually this semester, I think. But if you wouldn't mind, just maybe kind of give us a little bit more background on your experience, and then we'll dive right in.
Sure. I feel like I've been in a marketing role for my entire life. But part of that, as we were chatting about just a moment ago, started when I came out of a university. I first started in nonprofit, and part of that was, a desire to do something good in the world. Undergraduate degree in philosophy, and I'm not sure what you do with that, other than try and figure out how to help people. And so for me, that was a big motivation. When you're in your 20s, you think you're indestructible. You think you can do anything, or at least I did. And so my passion was to help, in this case, refugees, particularly children in Eastern Europe. The passion for people who were in difficult situations. It allowed me to be a part of an NGO that focused on going out and securing donations of both cash, but things that refugees could use. And we focused a lot on Eastern Europe. And so I spent about 5 years going back and forth to places like Kosovo and in Albania, and helping deliver aid to some of those refugee camps. Really profound impact on my life, as far as having to navigate really difficult situations with not a lot of resource. And then how do you have success? And the success in this case wasn't a return on investment. The success in this case was making sure that kids had shoes or medical supplies or cooking, just basic sustenance to survive. And so I did that for about 5 years, and then it transitioned to going into the for-profit world for a lot of reasons. One of that is to be able to have a family and to be able to support a family, but some very foundational lessons that I learned around not just marketing, but how do you make things happen in a resource constrained world?
Well, it's interesting. I used to work for an agency for Coca-Cola, and you think, well, they have all the money in the world. And they said, well, now, Steve, under a 1-liter bottle, there's 5 cents under the cap. That's our marketing budget. And you wouldn't believe how quickly it goes. And I get the point. I'm like, no matter what, we never have what we really want. We're always living in a constrained world. And there's something else too, and this is where I'd love to start, because there are a number of different constraints. Financial constraints are one. There's also constraints that the PE firms put on us, right? And you termed it as exit economics, and how that molds as a C-suite and chief marketing officer, how you have to think about the traditional marketing strategies and how they work in this kind of an environment. And I'd love to have you kind of elaborate on that a little bit.
Well, it really starts with, I mean, if you've gone through a transaction or you're at the beginning of a hold period with a private equity firm or sponsor who has invested capital into your company. They have purchased the company, and they've done that on a playbook. They understand that there's a time frame for them to bring money back to the firm, to their LPs, and so they have built a model, and that model is something that you go through in great detail at the beginning of a hold period. You have to understand what your milestones are for the next, 6 months, year, and getting to that kind of 3 to 5 year payback window. Now, every firm is going to have a different, threshold for when they want to see their multiple on capital coming back. But you really do, you have to start from the perspective of, this is not just a sustainable every year I need to produce, a double digit growth plan. You have to do that, but it's really how much do I invest up front to get either growth acceleration, and maybe that first year I'm gonna overinvest, and I'll get, I'll reduce my EBITDA, and then it will grow over time because now I've made that strategic investment in the first year of the hold period, that I know by the third year I'm going to actually see that acceleration, and I'm going to get that additional growth. So your entire existence is framed off of the model of the investment thesis of how the sponsor has come in and said, these are the things that we believe, based upon all of the work that we've done and all of the third party consultants that we've had look, to the depths of your financials and your existing playbooks, and this is where we think that you're going to accelerate. And they do that in partnership with the company. Ultimately, it's upon the company and the C-suite to drive that against those investment pillars, and make adjustments as well. If one of those strategic pillars is inorganic growth through acquisition, and there's just not enough out there to buy, well, then you have to pivot. So it's that lens that you need to have on how do you get to the end goal. And the end goal has a beginning point where you have a plan, but that plan is always you know, always subject to change, as long as you're getting to the end goal, which is that growth that allows for the next exit, and for your sponsor to get the return on the capital they've invested.
And like, what would be an example of how that changes as a chief marketing officer, your planning, right? How you go about the entire marketing function as part of the go-to-market.
Yeah. Well, I think part of that is really, you have to understand your unit economics almost better than anybody else. You have to understand that for every dollar I spend, I get what in return. And is that dollar per NQL, dollar per SQL, dollar per closed won bookings? Things like LTV to CAC or CAC payback period become a lot more meaningful. Less so in the beginning, but as you're getting through that hold period, being able to say, oh, well, our CAC payback period is less than 20 months. Well, that's now a good story for the next person who wants to invest in the company. So as you're thinking about the exit, you have to think about the next sponsor, the next PE firm or strategic that's going to come in. Why would they buy this company? And so every part of the story has to line up. Whether that's a product story, we're investing in innovation. AI is a huge topic right now. So, what are you doing on that front? But from a marketing perspective, it's, how do we take the pieces of the product story? How do we take the pieces of a, ECI in particular has grown through a lot of acquisitions, 55 to be exact. And so how do you take those 55 acquisitions and you piece that together in a way that's meaningful, not only for your customer, because ultimately we still have to deliver value to our customers. That's what's going to help us have sustained long-term growth. But how do we get back to, how do we hit our growth targets? Part of that is very much along the lines of putting the pieces together and understanding every part of the unit economics that leads you to, I do have a good story that says, if you're going to buy this company and you're going to add another dollar or euro or pound, or, that you're going to see that return, because I can prove that from a unit economics. I can show that over a period of time of how that's grown. And that's what not only gives us the value creation that allows for the, a good transaction at the end of a hold period, but it also gives confidence for the next sponsor that they're going to be able to continue that growth. And ECI has been very fortunate. Good leadership. I'm really proud to be part of the team I'm on, because this company has been able to every 3 to 5 years go through that transaction and create value for our shareholders, for our sponsors, every time in a way that's not just it's not just positive. It's significant and meaningful.
So there's so much in there that I want to unpack, and you mentioned AI, and I want to get to that. But you're talking about a massive balancing act that non-PE backed firms don't necessarily have, which is, the sponsor as a major customer, really, that you're trying to please, right? As well as the customer, as well as your own internal departments, right? That's, the number one challenge that, and I've talked to so many B2B C-suite executives, the number one challenge that they all agree they have is internal alignment. So you were balancing a lot, but there's something else in that you talked about in that balance, which is like the rule of 50 balancing act under a PE pressure environment. Can you tell us what that is, please?
Well, so I think most people know this, but for a rule of is a combination of your EBITDA and your growth rate. So you add those two numbers together, and a rule of 50 company is, when you're at scale, is rarefied air. There's not a ton of companies out there that have a, let's call it a 40% EBITDA margin and a 10% growth rate. So you're a double digit grower, but you're still, you're still controlling the cost of the company and delivering that bottom line value to, back to the business. So that's always a balancing act, because it says that you can't overinvest. You can't spend your EBITDA margin back into the business in an excessive way. So you have to control where you put that money. Now, that doesn't mean that you don't have money to spend, and that doesn't mean that you're not placing strategic bets, and that doesn't mean that you're not finding ways to still control cost. But you have to be very cognizant of every dollar spent, and that's the challenge for me on the marketing side is that my joke with my CFO is that I don't have a P&L, I'm just an L. That my job is to spend your money, and he grimaces and smiles, and but I also know that L has to turn into, it's got to be part of the profit of the business. It's got to have a return. And so, like I said, going back to unit economics, really understanding your channel structure, understanding where you can invest, and if I do need to go, and especially in the beginning of a hold period, and say I need $1 million more, and here's the two channels I'm going to put it in. And you give me $1 million more, I'm going to give you $10 million of bookings. And so having the confidence, number one, that you understand your data well enough, and you understand that you have that ability to do that. It really makes it easy to say, okay, we're going to do this. And as soon as you deliver that back, then usually what in my experience has been is that we're able to go get that budget when we need it. As you get towards the end of a hold period, that's where it gets a little more tricky, because that's when you really do have to show that the business can be accretive for the next buyer. And so you have to show that you have cost under control, but you're still growing at a double digit pace. If you put those two things together, it's not only a powerful story, it's one that is very marketable to whether it's another strategic who wants to come in and buy you, or another PE firm that says, we're going to make you part of our next portfolio, and commit to our LPs that you're going to continue that return that we've seen from the company over the last 10, 15 years.
So here's a big takeaway that I have so far is most of us, the CMOs, know we have to speak the language of the rest of the C-suite and the board, right? And so if we're talking to our CFO, we got to be able to speak that language, CEO language. Um, and in a PE firm, that's exacerbated, right? You can't survive without it. And in a deep, deep understanding of the economics of what drive the business. And too often, CMOs and I talk to a lot. We have an inferiority complex. We don't feel like we have a seat at the table. We're looked upon as the kind of the wild cost center, right? And is it tied to, like you said, you're the L on the P&L? And what I think the takeaway here is that if you're a CMO and you're listening here today, or any of the C-suite executives, is you've got to get deep into the business analytics, and that has to drive every decision that you make.
Yeah, and I think that, I mean, we've actually invested a good amount into the right people. Tools are one thing, and we're also on a journey to make sure that we have the right tools in place. But it starts with having the right people. And so, one of the areas that I felt very strongly about right out of the gate was making sure that I had a really strong marketing operations function. Marketing operations, not just managing my marketing automation or my martech stack, but really people who understand business and understand how to power Excel users, know how to take data, know how to take disparate data. And that's the hardest thing in marketing, in modern marketing, is taking disparate data, taking your Salesforce data, your marketing automation data, anything that's coming through that lead to cash system, and saying, what are the areas where we see both positives, and more importantly, where do we see either funnel leakage, or where do we see the speed to lead isn't happening fast enough? So looking at velocity, really being able to look at the data from a business lens and saying, what is the data telling me right now that I need to go fix, or I need to go address, or I need to start the company on a journey to fixing that. And so being able to look at that and going, I really do understand what's going on, not at a dollar in, dollar out. That's important. Those unit economics are foundational, but it's the next layer of data, the double click, or the double click on that says, okay, if I'm seeing weakness in my pipeline and I have 7 business units, where is that weakness? Is that in a contribution mix? Is that in a market challenge? And we serve some areas that have had challenges with macroeconomic conditions. We're in the residential home construction market, and with it rising interest rates, there's pressure on that division. So it's looking at it going, if I'm seeing softness in a part of my business, understanding, is that something we can control? Is it something that's out of our control? And if it's out of our control, what can we do to bring back control? And it's really getting to that business level conversation. And you talked about being, in a strategic seat at the table. That's how you get to that strategic seat, right? Bringing that analysis, bringing that data, bringing that understanding, and saying, this is what's actually happening, and here's the things that we can do as an organization to address this. And like I said, taking back some of that things that might be out of your control. Macroeconomic conditions, we really can't control. I can't control if there's tariffs. I can't control if there's if there's wars in other parts of the world that impact your supply chain. I can't control those things. But what can I control? Well, I can control exactly knowing how those things are creating impacts, and then seeing if there's ways for us as a company to be better aligned, to have appropriate mitigation strategies in place. And that's what gives you a seat at the strategic end of the table, which is, we know what's going on. We know how to at least address it, and potentially we know how to overcome it.
So I have to ask you this question because it is into the analytics. There was a study that came out a few years ago from Forrester that said for B2B companies that 73% of new annual revenue should be coming from existing clients. But we have this obsession with going after new logos and SQLs, right? And nobody is saying that that's not important, right? But that number, and one of the leading indicators of KPIs that most companies need to be looking at these days is NRR. What is our net recurring revenue, right? So keeping our existing customers happy and providing and planning expansion opportunities and paths for that. If you're talking about containing cost while doing double-digit growth. It costs a lot less to expand an existing customer and maintain those numbers. Just in general, in a PE-backed environment where the focus is so much more on the short term, even though short-term growth, none of us can go into a board meeting without somebody asking and saying, okay, well, how is this quarter's quota going? What's next quarter look like, right? It's all short. But the focus on NRR and customer expansion, how important is that in a PE-backed model?
It's so I would take it one step further of there's a high focus on, obviously your net retention, gross retention, but even more so, there's a high focus on churn. So what is your churn rate? So how many people are, going out the back door when you're trying to get them coming through the front door? If you can keep your churn rates low, you can, and again, you're expanding within your existing customer base is an easy lever for you to pull to create, just create value. So we have a ton of focus on that within ECI. One of our strategic investments has been retooling our customer success organization to make sure that we're very much in front of our customers. Every acquisition that we make that is not a new ERP, and we buy a lot of ERPs. We're specifically focused on the SMB, so we buy a lot of technology that's specifically for a market vertical, and usually created by somebody within that market vertical. So that's our niche. But when it comes to retaining those customers, so investments into add-on features that make their life easier, investments into things like AI that takes their existing technology and allows them to get more out of that. For us, it's a strong focus on making sure that the customer feels like they're getting increasing value out of the investment that they've made. And if they do that, then they stick around. ERPs are fantastic technology from a marketing standpoint. I worked in other companies where I was selling software that you could turn off pretty easily and it not impact your business. ERPs typically, are very sticky. They stay within a deployment, 10 to 15 years in many cases, and even longer. So once you get in and you're part of that core operations of the business, and they're depending upon you for that, then it's the onus is not on the customer to get value out of it. They will get value out of the system. The onus is upon us to help them get more value out of their investment. And so that's either teaching them just how to get the most out of the system they have, or providing options for additional functionality that may be part of their world that's not part of the core ERP, but gives them additional value if it's integrated, like payments or e-commerce, which are some functionality that we're introducing in most of our divisions. So just providing that additional functionality helps to mitigate churn because the customer then is seeing increasing value in the investment that they've already made in the partnership with you as their vendor.
Twice you've mentioned AI, so I want to make sure we have time to get into this, right? And AI is the popular conversation topic on most webinars, most podcasts, right? Articles. But I know at some point you've had the question posed to you, Ray, what are we doing with AI? Right? Like you're the man that has all the answers, and you go, I'm going to figure it out, right? We're all trying to figure it out. How do you, when you think about kind of the AI revolution that's reshaping how we market, how we get a return on investment, create efficiencies, you name it, what's your thought? Like, how are you looking at AI and incorporating it in the business today?
So I look at it from three specific angles. One is just pure marketing, and we're living in a world where search is changing, and in a way that's more profound than I think. I think people get a sense of this, but we're seeing it in the data that we're seeing impressions go up, clicks go down as direct result of zero click. So now your answers are coming in the browser, they're not coming to the website. We're seeing generative traffic, so things coming from Chat GPT or Perplexity or Claude we're seeing that on the rise coming through our, an inbound channel. People are now using ChatGPT as their primary tool for searching the internet. And that's just going to accelerate it. The more people engage, and I actually use ChatGPT, the voice application, and I have a conversation when I'm trying to do some research, and it's amazing, the amount of information I can get in a short amount of time just using that. And understanding that it might hallucinate and some of that data might be wrong, but it just accelerates everything. So I think of it purely from a marketing. How do we maximize our website for AEO and GEO? How do we ensure that what we're talking about in the marketplace is answering the answer engine type question? So that's one angle. The second angle for me is how am I optimizing my business leveraging AI? So using tools, the marketing automation tools, a market data orchestration, all of that now has AI components to it. I lead the BDR organization. Being able to listen to and analyze BDR conversations, and to pull out quick tidbits of this is what's good, this is what could be a coaching moment. Those things that used to take hours upon hours of listening through calls are now shortened because AI is doing the listening on behalf of a pre-described model. Here's what you should be listening for, and it's flagging that. So making that whole operation simpler, tying in things like voice recording, and then AI looking at that, pulling out the bullet points, and now sticking those notes into Salesforce. The bane of every marketer is, can you please just put in the right notes from your call to the sales organization? But now automating that and just saying that the recording is going to then summarize, and the summarization is going to go into your notes. So from a MarTech stack or RevOps stack, being able to look at how we can optimize our internal functions that way. I know in our development, they're using a ton of AI for code writing, and that's giving us the ability to either migrate old code to new code, or to shorten the code development cycle. So that's the internal piece. The third piece of it is very much, how is AI going to help our customers? So building technology, we released we have a manufacturing ERP, and one of the things that you need for building something is you need to start with the bill of materials. And that in the past has been something that you would get either a schematic, and then somebody would have to go in and enter the bill of materials. Well, you enter AI, take a picture, analyze the CAD drawing, look at your inventory, put the part numbers in, review that. What used to take an hour now takes 5 minutes, and you're off. So the efficiency that's increased for the customer with that, and the accuracy, because you're no longer potentially fat fingering a inventory code. You're now pulling that directly from the system, and it's all integrated. So looking at things like that say, how can our customers accelerate, and how can they take from an ERP perspective, all of the information that's within the ERP, look at that, taking that disparate data, elevating those insights. And ultimately, AI is not about something that's fancy. We want it to be practical AI, and that practical AI is, how are we elevating insights for your business, and how are you able to make better decisions based upon the information and the analysis that's taking place by the AI agent that's sitting behind the scenes. So those three areas, whether that's just how we're going to market, and how we're getting in front of customers, how we're using AI internally to optimize our own processes, and then how we're delivering an additional value to our customers. We actually just established what we call the AI Foundry. It's a team within the company that all they do is focus on, how can we use AI and agentic technology to ensure that our customers are getting the maximum value out of their investment. So you know, that's what they do day in, day out. So you're going to hear a lot more from ECI on AI and the different things that we're coming out with. But it is revolutionizing business in a way that I think we thought it could, but I don't think anybody thought it would be this fast.
I have to ask you this on the AI trend here, because you talked a lot earlier about you have to have the right data. AI needs the right data, right? If it's garbage in, garbage out, right? And if you just use ChatGPT with the generalized data that everybody has, you're missing a massive opportunity. And so I wanted to ask about data of the customer voice, right? And you talked about the call scripts, right? You talked about the conversations that are happening. We're talking to customers every single day. Their voice is the voice of highest authority in the business. I think McKinsey came out with a study and it said that, well over two-thirds of us realize as business executives, the voice of the customer drives ideas, it drives innovation, but less than 15% of us really act on it and activate that customer voice. Tell me a little bit about just kind of the customer voice, how it not only is driving, has the opportunity to drive us internally and align us behind that point of view, but how does it change the go-to-market in what we've been talking about here?
Well, I think it changes a couple different things, and I'm going to actually take it from a different vantage point, which is how does it change the customer experience? Because then where it shapes the go to market. So like many others, we do surveys, we reach out to our customers, but along the same line of what we do with the BDRs, we also do that with our customer success and customer support. We capture all of those phone calls, uh, and then we have an AI agent who is now listening for those keywords. And so things like, when someone's either having a challenge or they're suggesting a feature. Our roadmaps are now being shaped by those conversations. Now, you can't, if one person says, wow, I really wish that your product was blue, not purple, that's different than someone saying there's a gap in what I can do for my business. And if you could only solve this one little piece, that would make this far more valuable. So we're capturing those conversations, we're then analyzing those conversations, and again, this is all AI driven, where we're pulling those insights out, and then the product team and the developers can look at that and say, "Wow, that we either we have thought about that, but it was 10th on our priority list. We need to bump that in our up in our priority list, or we didn't think of that. That's a novel way to approach a problem." So letting the customer give their voice in a way that they don't even know that they're giving their voice. I mean, again, we use Pendos, we have surveys within products, we use um, just standard emailed surveys to try and get some of that, capture some of that customer voice. But where AI takes us to another level is we can capture all the conversations that our support team is happening, that they may not even hear what the AI would hear. And they may not flag a feature request in the same way that if you're listening to everything and then analyzing it, saying, wait, I heard this 15 times in the last month, there's something here that we need to start looking at. So really letting that help drive. Ultimately, we're a technology company that provides technology to customers, and they have to derive value out of that technology. So the more that we can hear from that, we have, 25,000 customers. The more that we can hear from them and be able to integrate that into our roadmaps and integrate into the value that we're delivering, it goes back to what we talked about before. That's what's going to prevent churn. That's what's going to make customers happy, really focus on that customer delight. And that's what's going to create value for the company long term, because you have that base of customers, and the ARR snowball is very much what we need to create in order to create that MOIC for our sponsor, and really value for shareholders in general.
So, Ray, I have one last question, and it's the most important yet. And this is the question that we have a hard time. We've talked about so much, but we have a hard time remembering and categorizing everything. If there was, in your mind, one main takeaway that you wanted your peer community, the C-suite executives, to take away from this podcast, in like a 60-second kind of like, here's the one most important succinct thing that you want us to take away, what would that be?
So it's going to be different than maybe you think. For me, I have a personal motto of leaving people better than I found them. And so it's investing in your people because I invest in my team. One of the things that I'm most proud of about in my career is I can count now 7 CMOs that are in market that used to work for me. And you know, part of our working together was they wanted to be a CMO. So we would talk about what are the things that I'm seeing and what are the things that I'm doing, and now there's those people are in the marketplace and they're leading their own companies. So to me, it's investing in people, trusting them, and letting their ideas flavor the strategic direction that you need to go. You have to be a leader, you have to provide guidance and strategy and coaching, but I've found that if I hire smart people and I get out of their way and I empower them and I'm there to break down barriers that they can't, that I get the most return on my investment of time, of energy, of capital. All of that comes full circle because I've found the right people and I've invested in them and I've trusted them to execute. And in most cases, that's been probably the greatest return, both personally and professionally, is what I see when we all have success.
I have to say, I wish we had another 2 hours because this has been really action
Yes,
packed.
it's a fun conversation. Yeah, absolutely.
But you know, the mission of this podcast is to bring different perspectives, different insights from different experiences together so we can all learn. And if we do that, that's the rising tide that lifts all boats. And I think you've absolutely been an amazing part of that rising tide today. And I just wanted to say thank you for coming on.
Yeah, Steve, thank you. I really appreciate it. This is fun for me, so I very much enjoyed the conversation.